In 1819, a fair-haired teenage girl stepped onto the stage of history as ruler of the most powerful empire on Earth. By the time she died, 1 in every 4 humans lived under her reign. Her relatives filled Europe's thrones, and the world had been utterly reshaped. Tonight we're stepping into the Victorian era. But before we go, are you comfortable? Really? Check your pillows, your blanket, make sure you're warm enough. Where we're headed, you'll want to be settled in. Your eyes blink open to darkness. Heavy damask curtains shut out the light. For a moment you're disoriented. Is it morning already? Somewhere in the vast palace, servants move quietly, their footsteps muffled by thick carpets. The air stings cold against your face, though the mountain of blankets keeps you warm. This is Kensington Palace. The year is 1819. You are not Queen Victoria yet. You are Princess Alexandrina Victoria, Dina to your family. And honestly, your life is not as charmed as it sounds. The palace is damp, drafty, and smells of mildew and coal smoke. You don't even have your own bedroom. Your mother insists you sleep in a small bed beside hers, and you're never allowed to walk downstairs without someone holding your hand. 5 years old, maybe that rule makes sense. But it will continue until you're grown. Good morning, princess, says your German governess, Baroness Lesen, the only adult who seems to truly care for you. Your mother snores loudly nearby, oblivious. The fire has gone out overnight. You can see your breath in the icy air. She doesn't believe in heating rooms too much. She thinks it's unhealthy. The windows are shut against the London fog, trapping yesterday's odors inside. Perfume, sweat, because even royals don't bathe every day, smoke, and the lingering smell of last night's dinner. It's not exactly the fairy tale you imagined. Your feet touch the cold floor. There are no heated bathroom tiles here. In fact, there is no bathroom at all, just a ceramic chamber pot behind a folding screen. Baths happen maybe once a week, when servants haul buckets of hot water upstairs to fill a portable metal tub. Your lessons begin in 1 hour, princess, Lesen reminds you. And oh, the lessons. Hours upon hours of languages, history, mathematics, religion, music, and art. Your mother and her advisor, Sir John Conroy, call it the Kensington system. You call it a prison. Mother says I must practice 2 hours of piano today. You murmur. And your Latin, Lesen adds gently. And your German, French, and Italian. Victoria really did master 5 languages. English, German, French, Italian, and Latin. Not exactly the carefree childhood most imagine. The truth. Victoria was achingly lonely. She wasn't allowed to play with children her own age. Her only real companion was her beloved spaniel, Dash. May I take Dash into the gardens? You ask hopefully. Perhaps, if Sir John approves, Lesen says with a sympathetic smile. But fresh air is a privilege, not a right. Every moment of your life is controlled, monitored. Your mother and Conroy fear illness, kidnappings, or, worst of all, that you might start thinking independently. They know something you don't. You are much closer to the throne than expected. Your father, the Duke of Kent, was King George III's 4th son. But through a mix of untimely deaths and a shortage of legitimate heirs, you have been pushed near the top of the line of succession. Sir John says I must practice my posture. You sigh, straightening your back. Conroy, a tall ex-military officer with perfect posture and a permanent scowl, has declared himself your trainer. Behind closed doors, rumors swirl that he is more than just your mother's advisor. Together they keep you isolated, preparing to control the crown through you. Kensington itself mirrors your confinement. The palace is gloomy, with peeling wallpaper, dark corridors, and shabby furniture. Even your dolls aren't for play, they are teaching tools. You must sew their clothes by hand. You aren't allowed novels or theater. Meals are plain and strictly timed. Every minute of your day is planned for you. Breakfast is simple. Porridge, bread with butter, weak tea with milk. Nothing indulgent, nothing exciting. As you eat, Lesen mentions a letter from your cousin, Princess Sophia. Cousins, so many cousins. The royal family tree is less like a tree and more like a tangled knot. Everyone marries each other. Victoria herself will later wed her first cousin, Albert. To them, this isn't odd, it's politics. Meanwhile, your uncle, King William IV, grows weaker by the day. You're 17. If he dies before your 18th birthday, your mother will rule as regent. If he dies after, the throne is yours. For you, it's a tense countdown. For your mother and Conroy, it's a race against time. Conroy bursts into your room one morning without knocking. The princess must sign the papers, he declares. He wants you to make him your private secretary, your mother your regent. You refuse. Even sick with fever once in Ramsgate, delirious and weak, you refused. I will not sign, you tell him firmly. You are a foolish child, he sneers. I need only what the law provides, you answer, steady despite the fear. That defiance will define you. Despite years of suffocating control, you will not bend when it matters most. May 24, 1837, your 18th birthday. You are finally an adult. Your uncle still clings to life. That night, you begin writing in a leather-bound journal, a gift from your mother. It becomes your refuge, your secret freedom. Over the years, you will fill it with more than 60 million words. I shall be glad to have my liberty at last, you write. Less than a month later, on June 20th, 1837, the king is dead. You are no longer Princess Alexandrina Victoria. You are Queen. Dawn breaks over Kensington Palace. You are asleep in the same small bed you've shared with your mother for as long as you can remember. Suddenly, there's urgent knocking at the door. The princess must come down immediately, a voice calls. Groggy and disoriented, you're helped into a robe over your nightgown by Baroness Lezen. Your hair tumbles freely over your shoulders. There's no time to dress properly. You must go alone, the Baroness whispers, breaking protocol for the first time you can recall. You descend the stairs by yourself. The drawing room is empty but for two men, waiting in solemn black, the Archbishop of Canterbury and the Lord Chamberlain. Your Majesty, they say, bowing deeply. And just like that, your life changes forever. King William IV died at 2:12 that morning. You are now Queen Victoria, ruler of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, future Empress of India, head of the most powerful nation on earth. You are 18. I will be good, you murmur, not to the men before you but to yourself. After years of being controlled and sheltered, you have become one of the world's most powerful figures. Try to imagine it. A teenager who had never been allowed to walk downstairs alone is suddenly responsible for a global empire. You have never shopped, cooked, or been alone with a man who is not a relative or servant. Now, your decisions affect millions. Within hours, everything changes. You move to Buckingham Palace and, for the first time in your life, have your own bedroom. You banish Sir John Conroy from your presence and keep your mother at a careful distance, giving her rooms far from your own. You summon Lord Melbourne, the Prime Minister who will become your trusted advisor and friend. The contrast is staggering. Yesterday, you needed permission to walk in the garden. Today, armies march at your command. The Queen would like her breakfast served in her study, you tell a startled servant. And she will review the state papers there as well. You are setting the schedule now, making your own choices, eating what you want when you want, and sleeping in your own room. But becoming queen doesn't mean you understand the world. You've been so isolated that you barely know ordinary life. You've never handled money, never seen how normal people live, barely left Kensington Palace grounds. Your Majesty, the people wish to see their new queen, Baroness Lezen reminds you, suggesting a royal tour of the country. And see you they do. Streets overflow with cheering crowds. Flowers are thrown before your carriage. After years of scandal and excess under your uncles, the public is enchanted by the idea of a young, innocent queen. They seem to like me. You marvel to Melbourne after one particularly enthusiastic reception. They love you, ma'am, he replies. You represent hope, a fresh beginning. Lord Melbourne, picture the ideal mentor. Wise, kind, patient, and devoted. He is 58, widowed and childless, yet completely committed to guiding this 18-year-old queen. He answers your endless questions without condescension, teaching you everything about politics, governance, and royal duty. Victoria adored him, writing in her diary of his cleverness and kindness. Historians suspect she may have had a crush, a teenager suddenly treated with respect by a charming, attentive older man. For nearly 4 years, Melbourne is Victoria's rock, guiding her through political crises and royal scandals. One of the first major controversies of her reign is the Lady Flora Hastings affair. Lady Flora, a lady-in-waiting associated with your mother, shows signs of what appears to be pregnancy. Victoria, already hostile toward anyone tied to Conroy, publicly accuses her of carrying his child, humiliating Lady Flora with a medical examination. Tragically, Lady Flora is not pregnant. She has a massive liver tumor and dies shortly after. The public briefly turns on Victoria for her harshness, a bitter lesson in the power and consequences of royal judgment. It wasn't Victoria's finest moment, but it revealed just how deep her childhood trauma and resentment ran. Even as a poised young queen, she carried the scars of years of control and confinement. Yet the defining relationship of her life was about to begin. In October 1839, her cousin, Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, came to visit the English court. Victoria had met him briefly 3 years earlier and found him pleasant but unremarkable. This time everything changes. Albert, now 20, has grown into a strikingly handsome man, tall with dark curly hair and piercing blue eyes. He is intelligent, serious, and shares Victoria's love of music and art. "He is so handsome," she writes in her diary that night. "His eyes are so blue and beautiful. His mouth is lovely." Within 5 days, Victoria is completely smitten. But there is a royal wrinkle. As queen, she cannot be proposed to. She must do the proposing. On October 15, 1839, she summons Albert to her private study. Hands trembling slightly, voice steady, she asks, "Cousin Albert, would you do me the honor of marrying me?" Albert's serious expression melts into a radiant smile. "Yes," he says, taking her hands. "We will be very happy together." For once, a promise about the future actually comes true. The wedding takes place on February 10, 1840, at the Chapel Royal in St. James's Palace. Unlike modern royal brides, Victoria wears no tiara, only a simple wreath of orange blossoms. She also starts a new tradition, wearing white. Before Victoria, royal brides dressed in rich, heavily embroidered colors. Her choice revolutionizes wedding fashion forever. This is one of the rare royal marriages based on love. Albert is devoted, principled, and genuinely attentive. He is strikingly handsome, a fact that contemporaries never fail to mention. "It was the happiest day of my life," Victoria writes in her journal. Even the wedding night defies Victorian stereotypes. Victoria enjoys her intimacy with Albert, writing in private letters of the joy they share. She later tells her eldest daughter that sexual fulfillment is one of marriage's greatest blessings. Yet Victoria is less enthusiastic about its practical consequences. Within weeks, she discovers she is pregnant. "I am not at all fond of babies generally," she confides. "I think they are very disgusting when they are small." Over 17 years, she will endure 9 pregnancies. She despises being pregnant, suffering severe morning sickness and comparing her appearance to a rabbit or guinea pig. Postpartum depression follows each birth. Albert, however, is an extraordinary partner. Unlike most aristocratic men, he is actively involved with his children, playing, teaching, and shaping their education. "He romps with the children in a way that makes my heart swell," Victoria writes after watching him roll on the floor with their eldest daughter, Vicky. Together, Victoria and Albert create a new ideal of royal family life. Domestic, moral, and outwardly perfect. They commission paintings of their growing family in intimate, informal settings, presenting the monarchy as an ideal of home and virtue. The public adores these glimpses of royal domesticity. Meanwhile, Britain itself is transforming faster than any human could have imagined. The country is shifting from rural agriculture to the world's first industrial superpower. "The population of Manchester has tripled in 20 years," Victoria remarks to Albert over breakfast. "The factories run day and night," he responds, fascinated. "We must see these industrial cities for ourselves. A monarch should understand how her people live." In the autumn of 1843, Victoria and Albert undertake a royal tour of the industrial north. The journey is astonishing. The train moves faster than any human in history had traveled before, blurring the countryside past the windows. Manchester is a shock. Hundreds of factory chimneys belch black smoke that blot out the sun. Buildings are coated in soot. The air burns their lungs and eyes water. "I can scarcely believe this is part of my kingdom," Victoria whispers to Albert as their carriage moves through streets lined with cheering crowds. Behind the spectators, narrow alleys reveal pale, thin children in ragged clothes. The contrast is staggering. While Victoria sleeps on fine linen sheets, factory families may share a single room, sleeping on straw pallets. While she enjoys elaborate dinners, children as young as 5 work 14-hour days in factories or crawl through dangerous mine shafts. This is the paradox of the Victorian age. Unprecedented progress and prosperity alongside desperate poverty and exploitation. Ancient ways of life vanish almost overnight as new ones emerge. And at the center of it all is a young woman who never expected to be queen. A girl who grew up in gilded confinement, now responsible for guiding her nation through the most rapid transformation in human history. "We must do something, Albert," she says quietly that night, haunted by the conditions she has witnessed. "What can be done?" she asks herself, struggling to reconcile the power of the crown with the suffering beyond the palace walls. Lord Melbourne cautions that interfering too heavily in business could damage the economy. Albert shakes his head. "There must be a middle path," he says, "between unfettered capitalism and total state control. Regulations to protect the most vulnerable, especially children." Conversations like these led to real reforms. Albert became a passionate advocate for better working conditions, public health, and education. Victoria, influenced by her husband, lent her support to many of these causes. But the scale of the challenge was enormous. Britain in the 1840s was in the throes of massive transformation. The population was exploding, from around 16 million when Victoria came to the throne to nearly 40 million by the end of her reign. People poured from rural areas into rapidly growing cities that had no infrastructure to support them. Sanitation, housing, public health. All were overwhelmed. In 1842, a shocking report revealed the horrifying conditions in mines and factories. Children as young as 4 or 5 worked in pitch-black coal mines. Girls were harnessed like animals to coal carts, crawling on all fours through tunnels. Factory accidents mangled workers' bodies with no compensation and no safety regulations. Reading these reports in the comfort of Buckingham Palace, you feel a weight settle on your shoulders. "The gap between my life and my subjects seems unbridgeable," you confide to Albert one evening. "Perhaps we cannot experience their lives," he replies, "but we can work to improve them." And improve them you do. In the early years of your reign, the Mines Act of 1842 prohibits women and children under 10 from working underground. The Factory Act of 1844 limits children's working hours and mandates safety measures around dangerous machinery. Small steps but important ones. Meanwhile, your family grows. By 1846, you have 5 children with 4 more to come. Despite your initial reluctance about motherhood, you form deep bonds with your children, especially your eldest, Vicky, and your second, Bertie, the future King Edward VII. Family life at Windsor Castle or Balmoral provides a respite from the demands of state. Albert redesigns parts of both residences to create comfortable, almost middle-class spaces within the grand royal palaces. You play with the children, sketch, practice piano, and enjoy quiet evenings that would be familiar to any well-off Victorian family. One family tradition Albert brings from Germany transforms British culture forever. The Christmas tree. In 1848, the Illustrated London News publishes an engraving showing your family gathered around a decorated tree at Windsor Castle. Within a decade, Christmas trees are common in middle-class Victorian homes. The children were wild with delight. You write in your journal on Christmas Eve 1850. Albert arranged everything himself, as he always does. The tree was lit with small wax tapers and decorated with gifts and sweets. The children could hardly be contained when they were finally allowed to see it. Your royal family's devotion, the emphasis on children's joy, and the domestic celebrations helped define the Victorian invention of the modern Christmas. Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, published in 1843, had begun to shift the holiday from a rowdy adult celebration to a family-centered festival, but your royal example cemented the new tradition. Yet while these intimate, joyful moments unfold inside palace walls, Britain faces a catastrophe that will test your leadership. In autumn 1845, reports arrive of a strange disease affecting potato crops in Ireland. By 1846, the scope is clear: a full-scale famine. Prime Minister Lord John Russell informs you that the potato crop has failed in many counties, with starvation already reported. What follows is one of the darkest chapters in British history. The Great Hunger kills around 1 million people and forces another million to emigrate. Government responses are inadequate, hampered by laissez-faire policies and anti-Irish prejudice. You personally donate £2,000 to famine relief, a sum worth millions today, and issue a Queen's letter calling for donations in churches across the country. But the scale of the disaster overwhelms these efforts. In later years, you will be called the Famine Queen in Ireland, blamed for events beyond your control. By the late 1840s, Britain is a land of stark contrasts. Unprecedented wealth exists alongside grinding poverty. Technological marvels like the telegraph and railway transform daily life, while diseases like cholera still ravage crowded cities. The Crystal Palace rises in Hyde Park for the Great Exhibition of 1851, showcasing industrial achievement. But in the slums, children still die of starvation and neglect. At the center of it all sits a queen and her devoted husband, attempting to use their influence to navigate a rapidly changing world. Victoria is no longer the isolated, controlled princess of Kensington Palace. She has found her voice and her power, and in Albert, a partner who shares her vision of a modern monarchy. "We have much to be grateful for," Albert says one evening in 1850, as you sit by the fire in your private apartments at Windsor. Outside, the winter wind howls around the ancient castle, but inside all is warm and peaceful. Your older children are asleep upstairs, the baby dozing in a cradle nearby. "Sometimes I can scarcely believe how far I've come from those gloomy rooms at Kensington," you reply, taking his hand. Little do you know that the greatest challenges, and the greatest grief, still lie ahead. Wake up. Not in your comfortable bed with temperature-controlled air and filtered warmth. You are in a small, windowless room in Manchester, 1848. The air stings with cold smoke seeping through the cracks. You are not alone. 5 other people share the 10 by 12 foot space, sleeping on straw pallets laid directly on the dirt floor. "Get up, boy." A rough hand shakes your shoulder. Mill whistles blow outside. Another day in industrial Britain begins. It's your father, already dressed in the same threadbare clothes he wore yesterday and the day before. Washing is a luxury, maybe once a month. Welcome to the other side of Victorian Britain, far from palace walls and royal Christmas trees. This is where the Industrial Revolution is real, in cramped, disease-ridden slums where the workers powering the British Empire barely survive. "I've got the cough again," your little sister wheezes from her straw pallet in the corner. She's 7, spindly-limbed, hollow-cheeked. In a wealthy family, she'd be protected, educated, cherished. Here, she'll start in the cotton mill next year, her small fingers perfect for tying broken threads on thundering machines. Imagine a Victorian industrial city. Hundreds of factory chimneys belching black smoke so thick it blocks the sun. Streets run with open sewage and factory waste. Buildings are packed so tightly entire neighborhoods never see direct sunlight. The air burns your lungs and coats your throat with grit. Your snot turns black by day's end. Your eyes constantly water, and your skin is never truly clean. No time for breakfast. "We're late," your father says grimly. Late means docked wages or worse, losing your job. And losing your job in Victorian England can mean starvation. No safety net, no unemployment insurance, no food stamps, just the workhouse, the final stop before destitution. You pull on your week-old clothes and follow your father into the narrow streets. It's barely dawn, but the city hums with the sounds of thousands of workers heading to factories. Cobblestones slick with muck. Probably something dead, slick underfoot. The overseer says I might move up to the spinning floor next month, your father says, his breath visible in the cold air. 2 more shillings a week. 2 more shillings. The difference between meat once a week or twice. Between light from candles or darkness. These tiny gradations define working-class life. Manchester's population exploded from 75,000 to over 300,000 in a few decades. People poured in from the countryside, drawn by factory jobs. The city couldn't build housing fast enough. What they did build was shoddy, crowded, dangerous. Streets teem with women carrying babies on their hips, old men hobbling on stiff legs, children as young as 5 heading to mines or factories. Everyone wears the same grey exhaustion on their faces. Did you hear about the Turner boy? A woman asks your father. Lost his arm in the loom yesterday. Company says it's his fault for reaching in while it was running. Your father just nods. Everyone knows someone who has been mangled by machinery. No safety guards, no regulations. Machines run constantly. Too slow or too tired, and they can crush your fingers, your hand, even your arm, leaving you useless, destined for the workhouse or the street. Ahead looms the mill, a 7-story brick monstrosity, hundreds of windows, the thunder of machines already vibrating in your chest. See you at dinner break, your father says, heading to the men's entrance. You enter through the children's door. Inside, the noise hits like a physical force. Hundreds of mechanical looms clacking, hissing steam, overseers shouting. Workers develop a sign language just to communicate. Many go partially deaf within years. The heat and humidity are relentless. Cotton threads break less if the air is damp, so the factories are kept sweltering. In summer, temperatures reach 100 degrees. Workers sometimes collapse from heat exhaustion. Cotton fluff floats like toxic snow, coating clothes, skin, lungs. Bicosis, or brown lung, will eventually be recognized. A slow suffocation turning workers into hollow-chested ghosts by their 30s. "You're 2 minutes late, boy," shouts Mr. Jenkins, the overseer. "A penny off your wages." 1 penny might seem trivial, but at 3 shillings a week, about $15 today, every penny counts. Victorian factory discipline is brutal. Fines for talking, sitting, even opening a window. Your work is crawling under massive looms when threads break or fabric tangles. Dangerous work. Machines never stop. Small bodies fit where adults can't, and children are cheaper to employ. 10 hours. That's your workday thanks to the 10 Hours Act of 1847. Before that, 12 to 14 hours was normal. Children as young as 5 working from dawn until after dark. Reformers pushing the 10-hour day were considered radicals simply for suggesting that children shouldn't work themselves to death before puberty. When dinner break comes, you sit on the floor with the other children, eating a piece of bread smeared with congealed animal fat. If your family is lucky, there's a chunk of cheese or an onion, a sip of water from a communal dipper. "Did you see the Queen is having another baby?" one older girl whispers. "Must be nice being royal." Even cheap papers reach the factory floors. Their sensational headlines a distant fairy tale compared to life in grimy blocks. "My mom says the prince is trying to help us," another boy says. Prince Albert genuinely pushed for housing, sanitation, and education improvements, but good intentions at the top take years to reach the ground. By mid-afternoon you are exhausted. Back aches, hands raw, lungs burning. Machines run indifferent to human suffering, and so must you. When the 6 o'clock whistle blows, you stagger outside. The air, polluted by modern standards, feels blissfully fresh. "Fish and chips tonight," your father says, forcing a smile. Your mother scraped together a little extra from washing. A luxury. Fried fish and potatoes wrapped in newspaper, greasy, salty, filling in place of watery soup and bread. Diets are poor. Heavy on carbs, light on protein and vegetables. Malnutrition is rampant. Rickets, from vitamin D deficiency, makes bowed legs commonplace. As you walk home, the neighborhoods shift in misery. The Irish Quarter is crowded with families fleeing the famine. Mortality there is twice the city average. Don't stare, your father warns as you pass children sifting through garbage. That could be us if the work dries up. The Victorian working class lives perpetually on the edge. One accident, one illness, one bad harvest, and a family falls from precarious survival into destitution. Back home, your mother has returned from her washing job. Hands red and cracked from soap and hot water. She's hung laundry on lines crisscrossing your single room. The damp, steamy atmosphere is uncomfortable but practical. The only way to dry clothes without ventilation. They're saying cholera's back in the East End, she whispers to your father. The word chills you. You've seen what it does. Violent diarrhea and vomiting, skin turning blue, healthy people dead within hours. In 1848, no one truly understands how it spreads. Some blame miasma, others punishment from God. Only a few doctors begin to suspect contaminated water. The truth was horrifying. In most industrial cities, drinking water came from the same rivers where sewage was dumped. In London, the Thames was both the main source of drinking water and the city's largest sewer. During cholera outbreaks, people were literally drinking each other's waste. We'll get some lime tomorrow, your father says. Sprinkle it around the door. Lime was thought to purify the air and prevent disease. It didn't stop cholera, which spread through water, but it might help with the constant problem of vermin, rats, mice, bedbugs, and lice that infested working-class homes. Your little sister's cough sounds worse tonight. In the flickering light of a single candle, her face is flushed. She's burning up, your mother says, pressing a hand to the child's forehead. Childhood diseases were killers in Victorian England. Scarlet fever, diphtheria, whooping cough, measles. They swept through crowded neighborhoods like wildfire, leaving tiny coffins in their wake. Should we call the doctor? You ask. Your parents exchange a worried glance. Doctors cost money you don't have. There's no national health service, no insurance. Medical care is a luxury for the working poor. I'll make her some onion syrup, your mother finally says. Folk remedies were often the only medicine available. Some worked, most didn't, but they were better than nothing. You settle onto your straw pallet for the night, exhausted. Your sister's ragged breathing fills the room. Sleep comes fitfully. The walls are thin. You hear neighbors arguing, a baby crying, someone coughing wetly above you. Bedbugs bite when the candle goes out, leaving itchy welts by morning. This is the reality for the majority of people in industrial Britain, not the sanitized, romantic version in costume dramas. Child mortality in poor neighborhoods hovers around 50%. Half of all children die before their 5th birthday. Adult life expectancy in Manchester is 17 years lower than in the countryside. Across the country, another disaster is quietly brewing, one that will finally force Parliament to confront the sanitation crisis. In the summer of 1858, London experiences what historians would later call the Great Stink. Years of dumping raw sewage into the Thames have turned the river into more waste than water. When an unusually hot summer arrives, the stench becomes unbearable. Parliament suspends sessions. Members hang sheets soaked in chloride of lime over the windows, a futile attempt to mask the smell. My nose was assailed by the most disgusting stench I have ever had the misfortune to smell, wrote one MP. It was like 1,000 privies emptied at once. The Great Stink finally accomplishes what decades of cholera reports could not. It convinces the government to invest in a modern sewage system. Joseph Bazalgette, a brilliant engineer, designs a network of over 2,100 miles of brick tunnels and pipes, diverting sewage away from the Thames to treatment plants downstream. The project employs thousands of workers and uses enough bricks to circle the globe twice. Completed in 1865, Bazalgette's system immediately reduces deaths from cholera and typhoid, adding an estimated 20 years to the average Londoner's life. Similar systems are eventually built in other industrial cities, though many poor neighborhoods wait decades for proper sanitation. The Great Stink illustrates a fundamental truth about Victorian society. Reform rarely happened out of compassion for the poor. It occurred when problems became so severe that they affected the wealthy and powerful. Back in Manchester, your family's daily struggle continues. Your sister's cough improves slightly with your mother's remedies, but she remains thin and pale. Factory work has already stunted her growth, as it has yours. Adults who began working as children are often several inches shorter than middle-class counterparts, bodies permanently shaped by malnutrition and overwork. There's a school opening at the church, your mother mentions one evening. Free lessons on Sundays, the only day children aren't working. Education, like healthcare, is not a right but a privilege in early Victorian England. Your father asks pragmatically, what good is reading to a factory boy? Survival often outweighs aspiration. Yet despite the hardship, working-class communities are not just collections of misery. They develop rich cultures of mutual aid. Neighbors with almost nothing take in orphan children, rather than see them sent to the dreaded workhouse. Families pool resources during lean times. Communities organize funeral clubs so no one suffers the ultimate Victorian shame, an unceremonious burial. Music halls provide cheap entertainment. Street vendors sell everything from meat pies to second-hand clothes. Religious organizations offer practical help alongside spiritual comfort. Soup kitchens, clothing distributions, basic medical care. Did you hear? They're putting gas lamps on the main road, your mother says, darning a sock by candlelight. Mrs. Higgins says they'll burn all night. Imagine that. Streets you can see after dark. Technological marvels, gas lighting, indoor plumbing, mass-produced goods, gradually filter down to poor neighborhoods. Progress arrives slowly, unevenly. One evening, a well-dressed gentleman appears in your neighborhood, knocking on doors and asking questions. He is accompanied by a local minister, who seems to know everyone. It's one of those government inspectors, your neighbor whispers. They're writing a report on housing. The 1840s saw the rise of social investigators, middle and upper-class reformers venturing into poor neighborhoods to document living conditions. Their shocking reports for comfortable readers help build momentum for reform. When they knock on your door, your parents are clearly uncomfortable. 7 people crammed in one damp, dark room. The inspector is respectful, asking about work, health, wages. He takes careful notes. No ventilation, no sanitation, he mutters. Exactly as Dr. Chadwick described. Edwin Chadwick's 1842 report on the sanitary conditions of the laboring population had been a landmark, explicitly connecting poor housing to disease and high mortality. It helped spark the public health movement that would gradually improve industrial cities. As the inspector leaves, he presses a coin into your sister's hand. For fruit, he says kindly. Fresh fruit helps with chest ailments. Your sister stares at the 6pence in wonder. It's more money than she's ever held. Can we really buy fruit? She asks once the visitors are gone. Tomorrow, your mother promises. We'll get an orange and share it. An orange. An exotic luxury imported from Spain or Portugal. A treat most working-class children might taste only at Christmas, if then. This small kindness, this tiny glimpse of something better, carries your family through another grueling week of factory work and persistent poverty. And that is often how progress arrived in Victorian Britain. Not in grand, sweeping changes, but in incremental improvements fought for by reformers, reluctantly granted by authorities, gradually easing the harshest conditions while leaving the fundamental structure of society intact. Meanwhile, in London's West End, another vision of Victorian life unfolds. Department stores display luxuries through plate glass windows. Wide boulevards are swept clean. Comfortable middle-class homes feature servants and indoor plumbing. The Great Exhibition of 1851 would soon showcase Britain's industrial might to the world, presenting a sanitized, triumphant narrative that conveniently erased the human cost of that prosperity. These parallel Victorian Englands, the grinding poverty of industrial workers and the prosperous comfort of the middle and upper classes, exist side by side, separate worlds occupying the same geography. Prince Albert himself recognized this contradiction. The wealth which the manufacturing districts have accumulated has been partially distributed very unequally, and has called into existence an entirely new population for which no place has been provided in the social system of the country. As you drift off to sleep that night, your sister's breathing sounds easier. Tomorrow will bring another day of factory work, another fight for survival. But perhaps, just perhaps, things might someday improve. The inspectors visit, the promised orange, the new gas lamps, tiny pinpricks of light in an otherwise dark existence. You are living through a pivotal moment in history, the birth pangs of modern industrial society. The suffering of the working class will eventually lead to labor laws, public health reforms, universal education, and a rudimentary social safety net. But that future remains distant and uncertain, visible only in the faintest glimmers of change. For now, you pull your thin blanket closer against the night chill and dream of oranges. Have you ever felt like you were looking through a window into another world? That's exactly what it was like in Hyde Park, London, on May 1, 1851. Imagine standing among 25,000 people crammed inside a building made entirely of glass. Sunlight streams through 300,000 panes, casting rainbows across polished floors. Above, a barrel-vaulted roof soars high enough to enclose fully grown elm trees. This is the Crystal Palace, centerpiece of the Great Exhibition, the most ambitious showcase of human achievement the world has ever seen. It's like a cathedral built for industry instead of God, murmurs a well-dressed woman next to you, clutching her husband's arm. And she's not wrong. The Crystal Palace was extraordinary. A massive greenhouse, 1,851 feet long and 454 feet wide, designed to hold a small town. Inside, 100,000 exhibits from around the world. Steam engines, printing presses, sculptures, furniture, textiles, and the largest diamond in the world, the Kohinoor from India. Look at that, a father tells his wide-eyed son, pointing to a hydraulic press. That's the future, my boy. Prince Albert, Queen Victoria's husband, is the driving force behind the exhibition. It's his vision, a celebration of British innovation and industrial progress. Victoria herself visits almost daily during its 6-month run, bringing her children to marvel at the wonders. The Queen's here today, whispers a guard to his colleague as you pass. 3rd time this week. She's fascinated by the Indian textiles. What makes the Great Exhibition fascinating as a window into Victorian society is that, for a brief moment, it brings together people from every class. Admission is set on a sliding scale. A shilling on cheap days for skilled workers, up to 5 shillings for middle-class visitors, and higher for special events. 6 million people, about a third of Britain's population, attend. Factory workers save for weeks to afford tickets and train fare. The wealthy arrive in carriages, the middle class by omnibus, the poor on foot. They've got a proper water closet here, a working man says, pointing excitedly to his wife. Water flushes away the waste. Imagine that in our neighborhood. For many, the plumbing is as impressive as the industrial marvels. Over 827,000 visitors use the public toilets during the exhibition. Yes, they kept count. But step just a few blocks away from Hyde Park, and the illusion of a unified society shatters. Narrow alleys lead to neighborhoods barely better than animal pens. London in 1851 is 2 cities occupying the same space. Buckingham Palace, gentlemen's clubs, department stores, and gaslit theaters exist alongside slums, workhouses, and grinding poverty. Mind yourself, warns a constable as you turn down a dark alley. The alley opens into a courtyard surrounded by crumbling tenements. Children with dirt-streaked faces play in the mud. A woman empties a chamber pot from an upper window, barely missing passers-by below. The stench of rotting food, human waste, and unwashed bodies is overwhelming. This is Street Giles, one of London's most notorious slums, known to locals as the Rookery. Similar neighborhoods, Jacob's Island, 7 Dials, Saffron Hill, dot the city like islands of misery amid prosperity. Charles Dickens, who knew these streets well, described Jacob's Island as the filthiest, strangest, most extraordinary of the many hidden localities in London. His novels vividly capture these brutal realities while contrasting them with the opulence of the upper classes. His novels didn't exaggerate the conditions. If anything, they sanitized them for middle-class readers. The class divide in Victorian Britain wasn't just about money. It was a complete separation of realities. Different classes lived in different neighborhoods, ate different foods, wore different clothes, even spoke differently. Most importantly, they faced wildly different odds of basic survival. Let me show you what I mean. It's morning in Mayfair, one of London's wealthiest neighborhoods. In a grand townhouse, the Earl of Harrington's day begins around 9 a.m. A valet draws his curtains, helps him dress, and presents a breakfast of coffee, toast, eggs, kidneys, bacon, and fish, all served on fine china. The Earl's clothes for a typical day include a tailored shirt with a detachable collar, a waistcoat, a cravat or necktie, a frock coat, pressed trousers, polished boots, and a top hat if he goes out. The outfit alone represents the yearly income of a skilled worker. Meanwhile, in a one-room dwelling in Seven Dials, Jacob Miller, a dock worker, has already been up for hours. He left for work at 5 a.m. after a breakfast of bread and dripping, congealed fat, washed down with weak tea, barely enough to read a newspaper through. His wife and 5 children share the single room, which costs half their weekly income in rent. Jacob owns one set of clothes, patched repeatedly. When they're washed, rarely, he must stay in bed until they dry. His boots have cardboard stuffed in the soles to cover the holes. The gentleman with the water cart says there's cholera on Bell Street. Jacob's wife tells a neighbor as they queue at the communal pump. 3 dead since Tuesday. Disease was perhaps the great equalizer, but its impact varied dramatically depending on your social position. When cholera struck, the wealthy fled to country estates. The middle class closed their windows and disinfected their homes with carbolic acid. The poor, crowded into filthy neighborhoods with no sanitation, died in droves. "My sister lost 3 in a week," the neighbor replies, filling her bucket from the same pump that might be contaminated with sewage from nearby cesspits. They buried them in the same box to save on the funeral. A porpoise burial, the ultimate Victorian shame, was mass interment for the destitute. The horror of this fate led even the poorest families to prioritize burial insurance. Weekly payments to funeral clubs that would ensure a dignified coffin, hearse, and individual grave. "We pay 2pence a week for each of us," Jacob's wife explains. "Better to go hungry now than be thrown in a porpoise hole at the end." The Victorian obsession with respectability created peculiar priorities. Families that could barely afford food would spend precious pennies on boot polish, clean collars, and funeral insurance, the visible markers of being decent folk rather than the truly destitute. For those who fell to the bottom rung, one institution loomed like a nightmare: the workhouse. The Victorian workhouse wasn't just a shelter for the homeless or unemployed. It was deliberately punitive, designed to make poverty so unpleasant that only the truly desperate would seek help. The 1834 Poor Law Amendment Act, known as the New Poor Law, mandated that anyone receiving public assistance enter a workhouse. "My John would rather die in the street than go to that place," an elderly woman says, her gnarled hands trembling. "They separate husband and wife. 30 years married, and they'd put us in different buildings like criminals." She's not exaggerating. Workhouses were designed to break family bonds. Husbands and wives housed separately, children over 7 taken from their mothers. Inmates wore uniforms, followed strict schedules, ate bland food in silent dining halls, and performed tedious, often pointless labor, breaking stones, picking oak, unraveling old ropes, or turning cranks that produced nothing. "My grandson was in the Lambeth workhouse," the old woman continues. "The girl was so thin you could see the bottom of the bowl through it. And never enough. A growing boy needs more than that." Oliver Twist's famous request, "Please sir, I want some more," resonated with Victorian readers precisely because such a simple plea would be treated as outrageous insolence in real workhouses. The workhouse cast a long shadow of fear. Many families went to extraordinary lengths to avoid it, including slow starvation, dangerous work, prostitution, or crime. Better the devil you know than the workhouse devil, a common saying went. Across town, in a comfortable villa in the new suburb of Bayswater, the Davis family represents another reality entirely. The rising Victorian middle class. Mr. Davis, a bank clerk, earns £300 a year, about $45,000 today. They employ 3 servants, a cook, a housemaid, and a nurse for their 4 children. Mrs. Davis has never cleaned a floor, washed clothes, or cooked a meal in her married life. Her days revolve around managing the household, making social calls, and raising her children. I've ordered a new dress for Lady Simmons' garden party, Mrs. Davis tells her husband over breakfast. The blue silk was simply too old-fashioned. Mrs. Phillips had almost the same style at church last Sunday. 4 middle-class Victorian women. Appearances were everything. Their homes, clothes, manners, and children were all reflections of social standing. Maintaining this facade often required ruthless economizing behind the scenes, cutting corners on servants' food to afford better cuts of meat for the family table, or darning sheets in private while presenting an immaculate parlor to visitors. The Victorian middle class was obsessed with moral respectability, especially as many were just a generation removed from working-class origins. They embraced rigid codes of behavior, religious observance, and social etiquette as ways to distance themselves from their roots. The Browns have let their daughter walk out with that young shopkeeper, Mrs. Davis says disapprovingly. I always said they were a bit common. Social climbing was an art form, with elaborate rules about who could associate with whom. Trade was looked down upon by professionals, who were in turn considered inferior to the gentry. Subtle distinctions in accent, vocabulary, and manners instantly identified someone's place in the hierarchy. Meanwhile, back in the Davis household, 15-year-old Mary, the housemaid, has been working since dawn. She's cleaned grates, lit fires, carried hot water to bedrooms, emptied chamber pots, swept floors, and dusted furniture, all before the family comes down to breakfast. Girl, the brass on the front door isn't properly polished, Mrs. Davis scolds. Mary curtsies and hurries away. She works 16-hour days, with half a day off on Sundays and every other Thursday afternoon. Her annual wage of £12, about $1,800 today, seems a fortune compared to factory work, though most goes home to her struggling family. Domestic service was the largest employer of women in Victorian Britain. By 1900, 40% of female workers were servants. For many working-class girls, it offered a path to literacy, regular meals, and decent housing, but at the cost of near-total personal freedom, and often exposure to exploitation or abuse. The master's son tried to corner me in the pantry again, Mary confides to the cook when they're alone. I told him I'd scream so loud his mother would hear. Sexual harassment and assault of female servants was so common it became a standard plot point in Victorian literature. There were few legal protections and the constant threat of dismissal without a character reference. Many young women had little recourse against predatory employers or their sons. Let me take you to one more home before we leave this tour of Victorian class life. In rural Hampshire, about 50 miles from London, the Reverend George Sutton lives with his family in a small but comfortable vicarage. A country parson with a modest private income, he occupies a curious middle ground, educated and genteel but far from wealthy. The roof needs repairs again, he tells his wife over tea in the garden. I shall have to speak to the bishop about additional funds. Rural life moved at a different pace than the frenetic industrial cities. Here, the seasonal rhythms of planting and harvest still dictated much of life, though even agricultural work was being transformed by new machinery. Steam-powered threshers were replacing flail threshing by hand. Horse-drawn reapers were cutting wheat more efficiently than teams with scythes. The Johnsons have had to let go 3 of their farm laborers, Mrs. Sutton replies. That new reaping machine does the work of 10 men, George. Agricultural workers were among the most vulnerable in Victorian society. Poorly paid, subject to the whims of weather and harvest, they faced the constant threat of mechanization, which eliminated livelihoods. Many eventually joined the exodus to industrial cities, swapping rural poverty for urban slums in hope of steadier wages. The The vicar's position gave him a unique view of his parish's social divisions. He dined occasionally with the local gentry at the manor house, counseled middle-class shopkeepers and farmers, and ministered to the poorest agricultural laborers in their cottages. "I visited the Wilkins family today," he tells his wife. "The youngest has the fever. I've left them what I could, but they need proper medical attention." For the rural poor, medical care was often limited to folk remedies, the occasional visit from an overworked doctor, or the vicar's charity. Hospitals existed primarily in cities, and many charged fees beyond the reach of working people. Friendly societies and burial clubs sometimes provided rudimentary care, but comprehensive medical treatment remained a luxury for most Victorians. Back in London, as evening falls, the three worlds we've glimpsed continue their parallel existences. The Earl dines on 7 courses served by liveried footmen before attending the opera. The middle-class Davis family enjoys a modest roast dinner before reading improving literature in their gas-lit parlor. Jacob the dockworker returns to his crowded room too exhausted to do more than eat a bowl of soup before collapsing into sleep. What unified these desperate experiences? What thread connected the Victorian Earl to the workhouse inmate? One answer might be found in the institutions increasingly shaping Victorian lives. Schools, hospitals, prisons, asylums, workhouses. The era saw the rise of bureaucracy and record-keeping, with official forms documenting births, marriages, deaths, crimes, illnesses, and poverty. For the first time, the state was actively categorizing and managing its citizens regardless of class. Another common thread was the unprecedented pace of change. Whether riding in a first-class railway carriage or working on the railway lines, Victorians of all classes were experiencing a world transforming more rapidly than ever before. Technologies that seemed miraculous in 1850 would be commonplace by 1870. Cities doubled in size within decades. Old certainties crumbled while new possibilities emerged. This relentless change created both opportunity and anxiety. The Victorian era saw explosive growth in the middle class as new professions and commercial ventures created paths to prosperity unknown to previous generations. But it also produced new forms of vulnerability, as traditional safety nets of extended family and stable communities frayed in the face of urbanization and industrialization. The class system itself was simultaneously becoming more rigid in social boundaries while more permeable in terms of mobility. New industrialists might buy country estates but find themselves snubbed by old money neighbors. Educated professionals claimed higher status than wealthy merchants. The expanding empire created opportunities for adventurous souls to reinvent themselves far from home. "My cousin went out to India 5 years ago as nothing but a clerk," the vicar's wife mentions. "Now he writes that he has a grand house and 10 servants. Could you imagine such a thing happening here?" The British Empire opened escape hatches from the strict British class system. A man of modest background could go to India, Africa, or Australia and return wealthy or powerful in ways that would have been impossible had he remained in Britain. Of course, this opportunity came at the enormous cost of colonialism, exploitation, and violence against indigenous peoples, a dark underbelly of Victorian prosperity rarely acknowledged in polite society. As night falls completely over London, gas lamps create pools of light along fashionable streets. In the slums, darkness reigns, broken only by the occasional candle or oil lamp in a window. The Crystal Palace, that monument to progress and industry, stands silent in Hyde Park, its glass walls reflecting moonlight. For a moment, in that gleaming palace, Victorians glimpsed a possible future, one of technological marvels, international cooperation, and shared wonder that transcended class. The reality of daily life remained far more divided, but something had shifted. The exhibition had shown what was possible when human ingenuity was unleashed. Prince Albert, whose vision had made the exhibition possible, continued to advocate for reforms that might bridge the chasm between Victorian Britain's parallel worlds, promoting education, public health, and housing improvements. Queen Victoria, initially focused primarily on her growing family and royal duties, was increasingly aware of the conditions her subjects faced, though her responses were often limited by her conservative views and constitutional constraints. And as you drift off to sleep tonight, comfortable in your warm bed with clean water at hand and medical care a phone call away. Consider how many of these basic comforts were luxuries beyond reach for most people in the Victorian era. An era not so distant from our own, where the foundations of the modern world were being painfully, imperfectly laid. The cough started in November. Just a tickle in the throat at first, nothing serious. By December 11, 1861, Prince Albert could no longer leave his bed. The royal physicians hovered anxiously, their whispered consultations growing more urgent. Queen Victoria barely left his side, her face drawn with worry. "It's just a fever," she insisted to her eldest daughter. "Your father has always been strong." But this wasn't just any fever. Modern doctors believe it was likely typhoid, a bacterial infection spread through contaminated food or water. In an age before antibiotics, typhoid was often a death sentence. On December 14th, Albert's breathing became labored. Victoria held his hand as life slowly drained from the man who had been her partner, advisor, and great love for 21 years. The clock struck 4:11. Victoria later wrote in her journal, "I asked if he had kissed me. They said yes, but I did not feel it. I went out of the room a moment to go to the dressing room and I thought I heard a strange, indistinct sound. I returned and Albert was lying on his back, quite still. Prince Albert was dead. He was just 42 years old. The world didn't end that night, but for Victoria, it might as well have. My life as a happy one is ended," she wrote to her uncle Leopold. "The world is gone for me." Picture Windsor Castle on that December night. Outside, frost coats the ancient stones. Inside, gas lamps cast flickering shadows on walls hung with rich tapestries. The prince consort's bedroom is oppressively hot. Victorian doctors believed fresh air dangerous for the sick, so the windows are sealed tight despite his fever. The air smells of camphor, beef broth offered unsuccessfully to the dying man, and the sickly sweet odor of approaching death. Royal attendants move silently across thick carpets, bringing ice to cool the prince's forehead, fresh linens, and the various potions prescribed by the physicians. Useless concoctions of brandy, quinine, and ammonia that could do nothing against the bacterial invader ravaging Albert's body. Victoria's 5 daughters wait in adjoining rooms, crying softly. Her eldest son, Bertie, the future Edward VII, is kept away, partly because his recent scandalous behavior at army camp is believed to have stressed his father. "Papa is with angels now," Princess Alice tells her younger siblings after Albert draws his last breath. This moment, Albert's death in 1861, marks a profound turning point, not just in Victoria's life, but in the character of the Victorian age itself. The vibrant young queen who had once danced until dawn would now transform into the perpetually mourning widow of Windsor. For the remaining 40 years of her reign, Victoria would wear only black, withdraw from public duties, and build a cult of remembrance around her beloved husband. And in doing so, she would both reflect and intensify one of the most distinctive aspects of Victorian culture: its elaborate relationship with death. The Victorians were obsessed with death, not in a morbid Gothic teenager way, but as a central ritualized part of everyday life. Death wasn't hidden away in hospitals. It happened at home, often in the front parlor, with the entire family gathered around the bed. "My grandmother kept grandfather in the front room for a week after he passed," a lady tells her friend as they shop for mourning clothes. Post-mortem photography was common. Families who could not afford a portrait in life would scrape together money for a final image of their loved ones after death. Sometimes the deceased were posed as if sleeping, sometimes propped among the living in family groups. Children might be posed with favorite toys. To modern eyes, these images are deeply unsettling. To Victorians, they were precious keepsakes, sometimes the only visual memory of a loved one. "How long will you wear full mourning?" the friend asks, examining black-bordered handkerchiefs. "A year and a day for a husband," comes the reply. Then second mourning, some gray or lavender after 18 months perhaps. Victorian mourning customs were elaborate, strict, and socially enforced, especially for women. A widow was expected to wear full mourning for at least 2 years. Entirely black clothing of dull, non-reflective materials like crepe, no jewelry except jet, and a heavy black veil in public. A widow who appeared too soon or in insufficiently somber attire faced harsh judgment. For poorer women, maintaining such a wardrobe was yet another financial burden. Many dyed existing clothes black or went into debt for new ones. Victoria took these customs to an extreme. She remained in full mourning not for 2 years, but for the rest of her life, 40 years of unrelieved black. Her devotion to Albert's memory bordered on the pathological. She kept his rooms exactly as they had been when he died, with hot water brought daily for shaving, and his clothes laid out each morning. "The Queen has ordered that the prince's side of the bed remain turned down," whispers a Windsor Castle maid to a new footman. "No one is allowed to touch his brushes or move his pocket watch." Victoria's retreat from public life after Albert's death caused a serious crisis for the monarchy. For years, she refused to open Parliament, attend public functions, or make appearances. While she worked diligently behind the scenes, reading state papers, corresponding with ministers, maintaining her meticulous journal, her subjects began to question the value of an invisible queen. "What does she do to earn her money?" demanded one newspaper editorial in 1864. Republican sentiment grew, with calls for abolishing the monarchy altogether. "Mrs. Brown says the Queen is coming to Balmoral next month," a shopkeeper in a Scottish village tells his wife. "Another summer hiding away in the Highlands instead of showing herself to her people." Yes, John Brown. He was a Scottish servant from the Balmoral estate who became Victoria's close companion after Albert's death. Rough-mannered, forthright, utterly devoted, Brown provided the emotional support and practical assistance the Queen desperately needed. Rumors spread that they were lovers or even secretly married, earning Victoria the derisive nickname Mrs. Brown from critics. Historians generally agree the relationship remained non-romantic, but it clearly gave Victoria comfort during her darkest years. When Brown died in 1883, she was devastated all over again. But zoom out from Windsor Castle and Victoria's grief to see how death shaped Victorian society more broadly. Death in Victorian England was ever present in ways difficult to imagine today. The average life expectancy for a labourer in Liverpool was just 15 years. In London, 26 for working-class men. Even the wealthy weren't spared. Infectious diseases like typhoid, cholera, and tuberculosis could strike anyone. Children were especially vulnerable, with infant mortality as high as 50% in poor neighborhoods. Victorian literature is filled with deathbed scenes of angelic children, reflecting experiences that resonated deeply with readers who had lost their own little ones. "The Thompson baby was buried yesterday," a woman tells her neighbor while hanging laundry in a London courtyard. "That's 3 she's lost before their first birthday. The little angels are watching over her from heaven." This familiarity with death created a culture in which mortality was acknowledged and prepared for rather than denied. Victorians invested heavily in the good death, a peaceful passing at home surrounded by family, with time for farewells and spiritual preparation. The funeral industry boomed as never before. Elaborate processions became status symbols, with horse-drawn hearses sporting black ostrich plumes, professional mourners, and mourning jewelry containing locks of hair from the deceased. For the wealthy, funerals could be extraordinarily lavish. When the Duke of Wellington died in 1852, his procession included a purpose-built funeral car weighing 18 tons, drawn by 12 black horses, with over 1 million people lining the streets. At the other extreme, the poor scraped together pennies for burial insurance. Terrified of the pauper's grave, some families kept dead relatives at home for days, desperately trying to gather enough money for a dignified burial. "My Tommy saved 3 years for his funeral," an elderly widow tells the parish priest. "Paid every week to the burial society. He always said he'd go into the ground proper, not in the parish pit with strangers." This preoccupation with death wasn't just fear or superstition. In an era of rapid change and scientific advancement, death remained the ultimate unknown, a mystery science could study but not solve. This tension between rationalism and spirituality shaped Victorian culture in fascinating ways. Take the scientific study of death itself. The Victorian period saw the birth of modern medicine, With tremendous advances in anatomy, disease, and treatment, medical schools needed cadavers for study, leading to the gruesome practice of body snatching, and in some cases murder, as in the infamous Burke and Hare case in Edinburgh. "They've put an iron cage over old Mrs. Wilson's grave," a cemetery watchman tells his colleague. Families feared resurrection men stealing corpses. Mort safes, iron cages, and heavy stone slabs placed over graves can still be seen in some British cemeteries today, silent testimony to these anxieties. Medical advances were remarkable. Anesthesia was first used in 1842, transforming surgery from torture to something bearable. Joseph Lister pioneered antiseptic techniques in the 1860s, dramatically reducing post-surgical deaths. Florence Nightingale revolutionized nursing during the Crimean War, establishing it as a respectable profession based on scientific principles. Yet alongside this rationalism, spiritual beliefs persisted. Seances, spirit photography, automatic writing, and Ouija boards became popular pastimes across all classes. Mrs. Ejeton is hosting a seance on Thursday, a society matron tells her friend. She claims her medium made the table rise completely off the floor last week. Apparently, Lady Westmollen's dead husband spoke through her. Even Queen Victoria, despite conventional religious beliefs, showed interest in spiritualism after Albert's death, though she never fully embraced it. This collision of scientific rationalism with spiritual yearning also fueled Victorian literature. Realistic social novels coexisted with fantasy, science fiction, and horror. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein explored ethical dilemmas over controlling death. Bram Stoker's Dracula played on fears of contagion and foreignness. Robert Louis Stevenson's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde examined the duality of human nature. "Have you read this?" a young man asks a friend in a bookshop, holding The Coming Race by Edward Bulwer Lytton, imagining a subterranean superior species with powers beyond human understanding. Victorians pursued knowledge and control of the unknown through science, museums, and technology, yet simultaneously sought comfort in spiritualism, ghost stories, and keepsakes of the dead. This paradox extended to medicine and the body. While mainstream medicine advanced, folk remedies and patent medicines containing alcohol, cocaine, or opium remained popular. Dr. Williams' pink pills for pale people cured my sister's nervous stability, a woman tells a friend. And Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup works wonders for my baby's teething pains. That syrup contained morphine. Many children were routinely dosed with opiates. Mercury, arsenic, and strychnine were common ingredients in treatments. Even cocaine was recommended for toothaches or depression. When Victoria gave birth to her last two children, she used chloroform, a controversial decision at the time, as many religious authorities argued that women were meant to suffer in childbirth as punishment for Eve's sin. Victoria's royal example helped normalize pain relief in childbirth for ordinary women. By the 1870s, Victoria was slowly emerging from the deepest phase of mourning. Though she continued to wear black and maintain many mourning customs for life, she made more public appearances, published works about her life with Albert, and took increasing interest in her expanding empire. The Queen has agreed to open Parliament this year, an excited newspaper editor tells his staff. "First time in ages. I want a full report, what she wore, how she looked, every detail." Victoria's gradual return to public life coincided with a shift in how the monarchy presented itself. Rather than emphasizing her remote majesty, royal publicity increasingly focused on her role as matriarch of a vast family and symbolic mother to her subjects. Images of the grandmother of Europe, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, humanized the monarchy and rebuilt public support. This familial image aligned perfectly with the Victorian elevation of domestic life as a moral ideal. The Victorian middle-class home was conceived as a sanctuary from the competitive, amoral world of business, a feminized space of moral virtue presided over by the angel in the house, the ideal wife and mother. A man's business may take him into all sorts of unsavory places, a vicar tells young women at a church social, but the virtuous woman creates a home where his better nature may flourish, where the children are raised in godliness, and where Christian values reign supreme. Victoria and Albert deliberately presented themselves as a model family. Their Christmas celebrations at Windsor, complete with German-style decorated trees, gift-giving, carols, and games, established traditions copied by middle-class families across Britain. Even in widowhood, Victoria maintained this domestic focus, surrounding herself with children and eventually grandchildren at Osborne House, Balmoral, and Windsor. Behind the scenes, however, Victoria's relationships with her 9 children were complex, controlling, critical, dependent, and affectionate all at once. Her eldest son, Bertie, the future Edward VII, bore the brunt of her disappointment. "If only you had half your father's intellect and moral fiber," she wrote in a particularly cutting letter. Her deep attachment to Albert's memory meant her children could never quite measure up to the idealized father. She leaned heavily on her daughters, especially Beatrice, the youngest, who was expected to remain unmarried as her mother's companion. When Beatrice eventually married, Victoria only consented on the condition that the couple live with her. "The princess looks happy today," a lady-in-waiting observes, "though I understand the Queen still requires her to spend every evening reading to her." Victoria's control extended to arranging advantageous marriages across European royalty. Through these unions, she became literally the grandmother of Europe, with descendants on the thrones of Britain, Germany, Russia, Greece, Romania, Spain, Norway, and Sweden. This web of family connections would have dramatic consequences during World War I, when crowned heads who were her grandchildren found themselves at war with one another. As the 1870s progressed, Britain itself continued its transformation. The second wave of industrialization brought telephones, typewriters, electric lighting, and improved transportation. Cities expanded outward with new suburbs linked by omnibuses and commuter railways. Department stores offered unprecedented choice in clothing, furnishings, and luxury goods. Yet Victoria remained somewhat apart from these changes. She disliked the telephone, distrusted electric lights in favor of candles and oil lamps, and maintained court customs increasingly seen as anachronistic. The Queen insists dinner be served exactly as it was in the prince's day. An exasperated royal cook complains. 40 years, and the menu hasn't changed. Victoria's devotion to Albert never faded. She commissioned memorials: the Royal Albert Hall, the Albert Memorial in Kensington Gardens, and statues across the empire. She kept fresh flowers on his tomb at the Royal Mausoleum at Frogmore, and in private moments spoke to him, wrote journal entries addressed to him, and believed he watched over her from heaven. When she died in 1901, her funeral instructions included Albert's dressing gown, a plaster cast of his hand, and a lock of John Brown's hair with his photograph. Final gestures of devotion to the 2 men who had mattered most in her life. The Victorian relationship with death, personal, ritualized, acknowledged, contrasts sharply with modern tendencies to medicalize, institutionalize, and avoid mortality. Their elaborate mourning customs, while extreme to us, provided structure and social support during bereavement in a world where death was constant. From our funeral practices and cemetery designs to literary traditions and medical ethics, Victorian attitudes toward mortality shaped much of the modern world. Victoria's 40-year mourning for Albert reflected the era's understanding that grief was to be incorporated into life, not overcome. Empress of India. The words hung in the ornate cabinet room as Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli presented the proposal in 1876. A new title for an aging queen, a consolation prize after decades of grief. The crown jewel of the British Empire should have a worthy title, Disraeli added, eyes on Victoria. Victoria, in her late 50s, considered the idea. She had never visited India and never would. Yet this vast subcontinent, home to hundreds of millions and ancient civilizations, was now the cornerstone of British power. "I rather like it," she said finally, a rare smile crossing her face. The title acknowledged Britain's global power and elevated her status among European monarchs. In an era when women had few legal rights, Victoria wielded influence over the largest empire the world had ever seen. To understand this fully, picture the British Empire in 1876. Color 1/4 of the world red on a map. That's 13.7 million square miles, 63 times the size of the United Kingdom, encompassing 458 million people, 1 in 4 humans alive. The sun never set on the British Empire, literally. At any given moment, at least one part of the empire was in daylight. It was history's most successful multinational corporation with a military arm that would make today's private armies blush. Its power began with trade, added guns, and then flags. The East India Company had controlled much of India since the 1750s, until the Indian Rebellion of 1857, called the Mutiny by the British and the First War of Independence by Indians, prompted the government to take direct control. "Did you hear? They're transferring India to the Crown," a London businessman says over brandy. Too important to be left to a trading company. 18 years later, Victoria was proclaimed Empress of India, solidifying British control. Imagine yourself in Bombay, now Mumbai, in 1877. The city swelters under pre-monsoon heat. Colonial stone and brick buildings tower over traditional Indian architecture. Streets teem with color, sound, and scent. Merchants calling wares, sacred cows wandering freely, spices mixing with less pleasant urban odors. At the Grand Bombay Durbar, British officials, uncomfortably hot in wool uniforms, proclaim Victoria Empress of India. Local princes, resplendent in jewels and silks, bow before a portrait of a woman they have never seen, living 4,500 miles away. British military bands played God Save the Queen while artillery thundered salutes across the sun-baked parade ground. The assembled princes, officials, and locals seemed, at least outwardly, pleased with the new arrangement. Though I doubt they truly understand the significance, a British officer's wife wrote to her sister in Hampshire. This patronizing attitude was typical. Most Britons in India viewed themselves as bearers of civilization to a backward land, conveniently ignoring India's ancient cultural heritage, sophisticated artistic traditions, and complex religious systems. Let's jump across the empire to the Caribbean. In Jamaica, the 1870s remained a time of hardship for the black population. Slavery had been abolished in 1833, yet freedom had not brought equality or prosperity. Economic exploitation, racial discrimination, and political disenfranchisement persisted. "My grandfather was a slave on this same plantation," an elderly man tells his grandchildren as they cut sugarcane under the blazing sun. "Now I am free, but I still work the white man's land for pennies. Some things change, some things don't." The plantation owner, a third-generation Englishman who had never visited Britain, lived in a grand house atop a hill overlooking the fields. His wealth depended on cheap labor and preferential trade agreements with Britain. This pattern, extracting raw materials from colonies and selling manufactured goods back to captive markets, lay at the heart of the empire. Now to Australia, where indigenous Aboriginal populations had been devastated by disease, violence, and displacement since British colonization began in 1788. By the 1870s, some regions had lost up to 90% of their original populations. Meanwhile, British settlers were establishing sheep stations, mines, and cities. In Melbourne, a prosperous city born of the 1850s gold rush, a wealthy wool merchant peruses news from London, 6 weeks old via steamship. "They've made Her Majesty Empress of India," he says to his wife. "Seems appropriate. The empire keeps growing. Perhaps all of Africa next." His prediction was almost prescient. The latter half of Victoria's reign would see the scramble for Africa, dividing the continent among European powers with little regard for existing cultures, languages, or polities. Britain claimed Egypt, Sudan, Uganda, Kenya, South Africa, and more. Back in London, these far-flung territories arrived in British shops as exotic goods. Tea from India, coffee from Jamaica, gold from Australia, ivory from Africa. The Great Exhibition of 1851 had showcased imperial treasures. Now ordinary consumers could purchase them. "Have you tried the new Ceylon tea?" a middle-class housewife asked her friend during a shopping trip. "Much more delicate than the Chinese variety, and it supports our empire rather than the celestial kingdom." For Victorian middle and upper classes, empire was largely experienced through consumer goods, investment opportunities, and national pride. The darker realities, exploitation, cultural destruction, racial violence, were conveniently distant. Yet the empire also thrived on missionary zeal, religious and cultural. Many Britons believed they had a duty to bring Christianity, civilization, and progress to backward peoples. "We have a duty to these people," a young missionary declared at a Yorkshire fundraising event, "to bring them the light of Christ and rescue them from heathen darkness." The audience nodded approvingly, reaching for their purses. Missionaries often learned local languages, provided education and medical care, and sometimes advocated against the worst abuses of colonial rule. But they also undermined traditional cultures and religions, serving as a vanguard for imperial expansion. One remarkable example highlights the bizarre contradictions of empire. In 1876, British forces invaded the Asante Empire in modern Ghana, looting Kumasi and demanding a massive indemnity. They took the young Prince Kofi Karikari as a hostage to guarantee payment. In one of history's strange twists, the teenage prince was educated at a Quaker school in England, befriended the sons of missionaries, and later studied agriculture before returning to Africa as an adult. Across the empire, such cultural collisions, coercion, adaptation, exchange, produced unpredictable outcomes. Yet the core reality remained unequal. British gunboats, rifles, and economic leverage ensured compliance when desired. Victoria herself held complex views of the empire and its peoples. She shared many contemporary racial prejudices but sometimes displayed surprising openness to other cultures, particularly Indian. After becoming Empress of India, she developed a genuine interest in Indian affairs and culture. She employed Indian servants at court, learned Urdu phrases, and cultivated a close relationship with Abdul Karim, a Muslim servant sent to her for the Golden Jubilee in 1887. "The Queen has that Indian fellow serving her personally now," a shocked lady-in-waiting whispered to her colleague. "And I hear she's taking language lessons from him." Karim, initially a lowly attendant, became Victoria's Munshi teacher, instructing her in language, customs, and culture. He grew to be one of her closest companions, despite repeated attempts by courtiers, officials, and even her family to remove him. Victoria fiercely defended him. "The Queen Empress has commanded that her Indian secretary be treated with the same respect as her European attendants," read an indignant household memo. Victoria's interest in India went beyond Karim. She advocated for fair treatment of Indian princes, learned about Hindu and Muslim customs, and occasionally opposed extreme racist policies proposed by her government. Yet, these efforts were modest countercurrents against the enormous tide of imperial exploitation. For most subjects across the empire, British rule remained a mixture of coercion, extraction, and cultural imposition. Queen Victoria was an abstract figure, a face on a coin or a portrait in a government office. Few could reconcile the grandmotherly woman in her black widow's weeds with the enormous imperial machinery operating in her name. In India, the Raj reorganized agriculture toward export crops, contributing to famines that killed millions. In Africa, arbitrary borders drawn by European diplomats divided ethnic groups and forced traditional enemies together, sowing conflicts that would erupt after independence. In Australia and Canada, Indigenous children were taken from their families and placed in residential schools to civilize them, leaving a legacy of generational trauma. And yet the empire also built railways, schools, and hospitals. It spread the English language, which would become a global lingua franca. It established legal systems and bureaucracies that many post-colonial nations would maintain after independence. "My uncle went out to India with nothing but his education," a young clerk tells his friend in a London pub. "Now he's a district commissioner with a big house and 10 servants. Could never have that life here." The empire created opportunities for ambitious young Britons, second sons who wouldn't inherit land, educated women with few prospects at home, working-class men with technical skills. All could find advancement abroad unavailable in Britain's rigid class system. For colonial administrators, soldiers, missionaries, teachers, nurses, and engineers, the empire offered a chance to reinvent themselves. Many believed sincerely in their civilizing mission. Others were simply seeking fortune or adventure. All were participating in a system built fundamentally on inequality and exploitation. Back in London, Victoria was increasingly seen as the symbolic mother of this global imperial family. Her Golden Jubilee in 1887 and Diamond Jubilee in 1897 were spectacles of imperial pageantry. Colonial troops from across the empire, turbaned Sikh soldiers, Maori warriors, Canadian Mounties, African regiments, marched through London streets, displaying the global reach of British power. "It's quite a sight," an American visitor remarked, "though I wonder how long they can hold it all together." By the late Victorian period, nationalism was stirring in many colonies. In India, the Indian National Congress was founded in 1885, marking the beginnings of organized struggle for independence. In Ireland, Home Rule movements gained momentum. Seeds of decolonization were planted even as the empire reached its territorial peak. Victoria herself would never see its decline. When she died in 1901, British imperial confidence remained high, even as the Boer War tested it. For Victoria, the empire symbolized British greatness. For Londoners or Liverpudlians, it meant exotic goods and national pride. For colonial officials in Bombay or Cairo, it meant power and status. For Indigenous Australians and Canadians, it meant displacement and cultural destruction. For Indian peasants or Caribbean workers, it meant economic exploitation under foreign masters. All these experiences composed the Victorian Empire, a vast, contradictory global system encompassing nearly a quarter of humanity. As you lie in your comfortable bed tonight, look around your room. Cotton sheets, tea in the cupboard, a wooden bookshelf, chocolate in the kitchen, each a product of empire. Cotton from Egypt or India, tea from Ceylon, mahogany from the Caribbean, cocoa from West Africa. The Victorian Empire has faded, but its legacies, good and ill, continue to shape our world. At the center of this global web sat one small woman in perpetual black. Victoria, Queen of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, Defender of the Faith, and after 1876, Empress of India. The carriage rattles to a stop at King's Cross Station. It's 1885. You step onto the bustling platform beneath the massive iron and glass roof. Sunlight streams through diagonal shafts, cutting through steam and smoke. Porters push trolleys piled with luggage. Ladies clutch hatboxes. Businessmen check pocket watches and frown at the timetables. Schoolboys chase each other around iron pillars while their harried teacher struggles to count heads. And dominating it all, the trains, massive iron beasts hissing steam, polished brass fittings gleaming, lined up like impatient thoroughbreds ready to thunder to Edinburgh, York, Manchester, or 100 other destinations. All aboard for the 10:15 to Brighton, bellows a guard swinging his lamp. The railway, more than electricity, factories, or telegraphy, transformed 19th century life. First time in London, Miss asks a porter wide-eyed. King's Cross itself is a cathedral of transport. Its enormous clock and timetables connecting people to places they've barely heard of. For all of human history until the early 1800s, the fastest overland travel was the galloping horse, 25 miles per hour at most, unsustainable over long distances. Ordinary people moved at walking pace. The wealthy in carriages at 10 to 12 miles per hour. Suddenly, trains could reach 50 to 70 miles per hour. Journeys that once took days now took hours. My grandfather rode the first passenger railway in 1830, an elderly gentleman tells his grandson as they wait for their train. They called the engine the rocket. People thought it would scramble your brains or make your blood boil. By the 1880s, such fears seemed laughable. Britain now had over 15,000 miles of track. You could board a train in London after breakfast and reach Edinburgh for dinner, a journey that once required 3 days by stagecoach. Standardized time replaced local solar time to keep timetables consistent. "Mind the gap, sir," calls a platform attendant as a distracted businessman nearly steps between train and platform. Railways transformed more than travel. They reshaped geography. New towns sprouted around junctions. Bypassed market towns withered. Seaside resorts like Brighton and Blackpool boomed with day trippers and vacationers arriving by train. You board a third-class carriage. Wooden benches, clean, reasonably comfortable. First-class passengers enjoy upholstered seats. More space, dining cars. With a whistle and a lurch, the train pulls away. The rhythmic clacking of wheels on track hypnotizes as London slides past. Brick houses, factories belching smoke, church spires, then green fields and hedges. Family shares your compartment. The youngest boy bounces with excitement. My first time on a train. We're going to visit my aunt in Oxford. Father says it's 60 miles. Less than 2 hours. The railways didn't just move people. They moved goods, information, and ideas. Fresh milk and produce reached cities before spoiling. Newspapers printed in London could be read in Manchester by afternoon. Mail delivery, once weekly in remote areas, became daily. Did you see the latest about that Edison fellow? A businessman asks, folding his newspaper. He's working on a moving picture machine now. First the photograph, then electric light. Now this American with his gadgets. Edison was one of many inventors transforming daily life. In a single lifetime, Victorians witnessed railways, photography, telegraphy, telephones, electric lighting, automobiles, and more. A dizzying pace of change. As the countryside rolls past in a green blur, villages appear and vanish. Church spires mark small towns. Railway bridges cast fleeting shadows across your window. 2 hours cover what once required a full day by coach. Disembarking, another marvel awaits. The telegraph office. A clerk waits with Morse key at hand, a map of telegraph lines spanning continents and oceans behind him. I'd like to send a message to London, a woman ahead in line requests. To my husband, just to let him know I've arrived safely. The clerk hands her a form and pencil. 20 words for a shilling, each additional word tuppence. The telegraph, first invented in the 1830s, widespread by the 1850s, was the Victorian internet, shrinking the world in real time. For the first time in human history, messages could travel faster than a physical messenger. News that once took weeks or months could now circulate globally in hours. When Queen Victoria's husband Albert died in 1861, telegraphs carried the news almost instantly to distant parts of the empire. During the Indian Rebellion of 1857, telegraph operators had been crucial, warning of approaching rebels and coordinating the British military response. One last message from a besieged station reportedly read simply, "Thesios are coming. We are." Before falling silent. "Just sent a wire to my broker in the city," a prosperous-looking gentleman tells his companion as they leave the office. "South African mining stocks are falling. Told him to sell before we lose everything." The telegraph transformed business as much as personal communication. Stock prices, commodity values, and market information could now travel instantly, creating truly global markets for the first time. Standardized codes reduced word counts, saving money and maintaining security. As dusk falls, you witness another Victorian marvel: electric street lighting. Arc lamps sputter and glow with harsh blue-white brilliance, turning night into a pale day. Not all streets have them yet. Gas lighting still predominates. They're putting them in all along the high street next month, a shopkeeper tells a customer. Council says it's safer and cleaner. No more gas leaks or fire risk. Electric lights gradually replaced gas, their advantages: no smell, no heat, no open flame, winning out, though adoption in homes was slow. Wealthy households might have a few electric lights in public rooms, while middle-class homes started with a single parlor fixture. Working-class families still relied primarily on candles and oil lamps. You find lodging for the night at a modest hotel advertising an electric bell in every room. Small innovations often preceded larger changes. The next morning after breakfast, you set out to explore a telephone exchange. One of the newest technological marvels of the 1880s. Patented by Alexander Graham Bell in 1876, the telephone was still rare. By 1881, London had only about 750 subscribers. The instruments were cumbersome: separate mouthpiece and earpiece, a hand crank to generate the ringing current. "National Telephone Company," announces the receptionist as you enter the exchange. "Do you wish to place a call?" Behind her, a room full of young women operators sits before a massive switchboard. physically connecting cables to the right sockets. Their dexterity is remarkable as they juggle multiple calls, repeating "number, please" with clarity and precision. Most subscribers were businesses, law firms, newspapers, factories, and a few wealthy private homes. "My wife wants one installed at home," a businessman confides. She could chat with her sister across town without sending a messenger. His companion scoffs. Servants and calling cards serve that purpose. And who wants wires ruining the decor? Aesthetics were a genuine concern in Victorian adoption of new technologies. Telephone components were often hidden in carved wooden cabinets, electric lights designed to mimic gas lamps, electric kettles made to look like traditional stovetop models. Leaving the exchange, you pass a photography studio. By the 1880s, photography, invented in the 1830s, had become accessible to the middle classes. The complex daguerreotype process had been replaced by dry plate negatives, cutting both cost and exposure time. "No need to hold still more than a moment," the photographer calls from his doorway. Examples line the walls. Solemn families in rigid groupings, stern gentlemen, demure ladies, occasional smiling children. Photography had democratized portraiture once reserved for the wealthy. Middle-class families displayed multiple prints at home. Working-class families might save for a single treasured photograph marking a special occasion. "My daughter's wedding next month," a woman explains. "We want a large print for the parlor and small cards to distribute to family." Cartes de visite, small photographic calling cards, had been popular since the 1860s, collected and exchanged, even sold by celebrities as early fan merchandise. Queen Victoria herself maintained detailed family photo albums. Next, you explore a large department store, another hallmark of Victorian innovation. Electric lights illuminate displays of consumer goods from across the empire. "We've just received the new Singer sewing machines," a saleswoman tells a customer. "Much easier to operate than the previous model. Every modern household should have one." Patented in the 1840s, mass-produced by the 1850s, sewing machines revolutionized both commercial and home garment production. Ready-made clothing became more affordable. Home seamstresses could complete garments in days rather than weeks. Other domestic innovations abound. Carpet sweepers, precursors to vacuum cleaners, mechanical egg beaters, improved cooking stoves, washing mangles. The late Victorian period saw a surge in labor-saving devices aimed at middle-class households. Demonstrating a gas cooker, a salesman explains. "Precise temperature control. No more burnt Sunday roasts." For the wealthy, these innovations reduced staff needs. For the middle class, they enabled comfortable domestic life. For the working class, they were largely out of reach, though production provided factory jobs. As evening approaches, you descend to the London Underground, the world's first underground railway, opened in 1863. By the 1880s, several lines run beneath London, initially steam-powered, gradually transitioning to electric traction. The distinctive smell of coal, smoke, steam, dust, and humanity hits you. Despite ventilation shafts, the atmosphere is thick. Passengers of all classes crowd the platform, a rare democratic space in class-conscious Victorian society. "Mind your step," calls a guard as a train pulls in, brakes squealing against iron wheels. Gas lamps light the carriages, bright islands in the tunnel darkness. You board with the evening crowd. Office workers heading home, shop girls ending long shifts, theatergoers in evening attire. Used to be terrified of these underground trains, an elderly woman whispers. Thought the tunnels would collapse or we'd suffocate from smoke. Now I take it weekly to visit my daughter in Paddington. The railways, telegraphs, telephones, electric lights, photography, and department stores. These were the arteries and organs of Victorian life. They shrank the world, accelerated communication, and transformed everyday experience, blending innovation, commerce, and social change in ways the people of the 1880s could scarcely have imagined. Couldn't manage the distance otherwise at my age. You hear an elderly commuter remark as the underground rattles beneath London. The railway transformed the city, enabling expansion outward while workers could still reach central offices. New suburbs grew around stations, creating the first true commuter communities. Social patterns shifted as people could now live miles from their workplaces. Your underground journey takes you to a music hall, another Victorian innovation, this one cultural rather than technological. The hall is rowdy and vibrant, hosting singers, comedians, acrobats, and novelty acts. Between performances, a man demonstrates Edison's phonograph, patented in 1877, capable of recording and reproducing sound. You can hear the voice of someone miles away, or even someone who has passed, he proclaims. The scratchy reproduction of a popular song captivates the audience. The phonograph was one of many devices capturing previously ephemeral realities. Photography preserved images, sound recording preserved voices, and inventors were beginning to experiment with motion pictures. "They're working on moving photographs now," a young man whispers. "Imagine seeing a train coming at you or waves breaking on a shore, all on a screen." In the 1880s, devices like the zoetrope and praxinoscope created illusions of movement, while Edison's kinetoscope and the Lumiere brothers' cinematograph were still under development. Commercial cinema was still years away. Returning to your lodgings, you reflect on the dizzying pace of change. Someone born in 1820 who lived into the 1880s would have seen transport transformed from horse-drawn coaches to steam railways, underground trains, and the earliest automobiles. Communication evolved from handwritten letters to telegraphs and telephones. Lighting progressed from candles to gas to electricity. Photography, sound recording, and early cinema emerged. Victorians responded with both awe and anxiety. Literature of the era reflected this duality. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein warned of technology outpacing morality, while H.G. Wells' The Time Machine, 1895, explored both the promise and perils of invention. "My father still refuses to have electricity in the house," a young woman tells her friend in your boarding house. "It's unnatural and dangerous, but I think it's wonderful. Clean light at the touch of a button. No more trimming wicks or cleaning lamp chimneys." Her friend nods. "My brother works for the telephone company. He says in 20 years every house will have a telephone and electric lights." Imagine that. Indeed, innovations that seemed miraculous or frightening to Victorians would soon become commonplace. The technological groundwork laid during Victoria's reign, transport, communication, manufacturing, domestic technology, created the foundation for the modern world. Outside, the distant whistle of a steam train mingles with the clop of horse hooves on cobblestones, old and new coexisting in the late Victorian age. At Osborne House, Queen Victoria, who had seen Britain transform from an agricultural society to an industrial powerhouse, dictates letters by lamplight, never fully embracing electric illumination in her private rooms. Like her subjects, she straddled tradition and innovation. Snow falls gently outside the bay window of the Thompson family home in December 1890. Inside, a fire crackles, casting warm light across the cozy parlor. Mrs. Thompson adjusts a strand of holly on the mantelpiece while her husband reads the newspaper. Their 3 children play with a wooden train set, a treasured Christmas gift from last year. Before Victoria's reign, Christmas had been a minor holiday. By the 1890s, it had evolved into elaborate celebrations centered on family and home. "I think we'll put the tree in front of the window this year," Mrs. Thompson says. "The neighbors will be able to see it as they pass." The Christmas tree, largely unknown in Britain before Victoria and Albert popularized it, had become a middle-class essential. Albert had introduced the German tradition, and when the Illustrated London News published an engraving of the royal family around their decorated tree in 1848, the trend took off. By the 1890s, trees were taller, more elaborate, and adorned with manufactured glass ornaments from Germany. Candles remained standard, though they were a fire hazard. Christmas cards, first commercially produced in 1843, sat alongside the holly on the mantelpiece. By century's end, sending and receiving cards had become a major holiday tradition. "Mrs. Petton sent a lovely card this year," Mrs. Thompson remarks, admiring an embossed creation featuring angels and golden bells. Social nuances, card quality, arrival timing, and signatures reflected complex middle-class etiquette. The Thompson home exemplifies Victorian domestic ideals. Semi-detached and respectable, with distinct rooms for distinct purposes, it reflects the era's emphasis on order and propriety. The front parlor hosts guests and family gatherings. A back parlor serves as the dining room. Upstairs are bedrooms and a small bathroom with running water, still a luxury in the 1890s. The parlor is filled with furniture and decorative objects. A piano, armchairs, side tables, lamps, photographs, potted plants, figurines, embroidered cushions, heavy carpet, drapes, and patterned wallpaper. To modern eyes, it may seem cluttered, but to Victorians, it conveyed comfort, prosperity, and good taste. "Papa, will we have roast goose for Christmas dinner?" asks 10-year-old William, setting aside a toy soldier. "I believe your mother has ordered one from the butcher," Mr. Thompson replies. The dinner includes roast potatoes, parsnips, Brussels sprouts, carrots, cranberry sauce, bread sauce, stuffing, and the grand finale. Christmas pudding, prepared weeks in advance and doused with brandy before being ceremonially set alight. "Emily, come here and let me fix your hair before bedtime," Mrs. Thompson calls, setting aside her needlework. She braids her daughter's long brown hair, a small gesture illustrating Victorian gender roles. The mother presides over home and children, the father occupies the public sphere. Yet hardship persists outside this middle-class sanctuary. "I saw the most distressing sight on my way home," Mr. Thompson remarks. "Street children begging near the station. No proper coats or shoes. Child poverty remained stark despite social reforms. Working-class children might still labor in factories or shops, though laws had improved conditions somewhat. Perhaps we should make a donation to Dr. Barnardo's orphanage," Mrs. Thompson suggests, invoking one of the many Victorian charities established to aid destitute children. In these domestic spaces, the era's ideals of home, family, childhood, and social conscience were enacted, reflecting the centrality of domestic life in Victorian culture and the contrasting realities beyond it. As part of their Christmas giving, charitable donations were considered a moral duty for respectable Victorian families, especially during the holiday season. The influence of Dickens's A Christmas Carol, with its themes of generosity and redemption, had helped cement the idea that Christmas was a time to remember the less fortunate. "An excellent idea, my dear William and Emily. You should each set aside a portion of your pocket money as well," Mrs. Thompson instructs. "It will teach you the importance of helping those less fortunate." Victorian moral education emphasized duty, self-discipline, and character development. Children learn these values through instruction and practice, with parents serving as primary moral guides. "Now, children, time for bed. You may each choose one story before prayers." The Thompsons, like many families of their class, practiced daily family prayers alongside regular church attendance. Religious observance was woven into daily life. Morning and evening prayers, grace before meals, and Sundays reserved for worship and quiet activities. As the children select books from the small family library, another aspect of Victorian home life comes into view: the importance of reading as entertainment and moral instruction. Books for children had expanded dramatically during Victoria's reign, evolving from overtly didactic religious tracts to include adventure stories, fairy tales, and novels written specifically for young readers. "I want Alice in Wonderland," Emily declares, pulling the volume from the shelf. "And I'll have Treasure Island," William adds. These choices reflect the golden age of children's literature that flourished in Victorian Britain, with Lewis Carroll, R.L. Stevenson, E. Nesbit, and others creating works still read today. Reading aloud was common, bringing the family together for entertainment and instruction. After the children are escorted upstairs by Mrs. Thompson for their bedtime routine, Mr. Thompson sits alone in the parlor, enjoying a quiet pipe, a common Victorian ritual. He contemplates the stack of Christmas gifts hidden in his study, waiting to be wrapped and placed under the tree on Christmas Eve. The Victorian gift-giving tradition had evolved significantly. Early gifts were small and often handmade. Carved wooden toys, embroidered handkerchiefs, preserved fruits, nuts, and candies. By the 1890s, the consumer revolution had transformed gift-giving. manufactured toys, books, clothing, and decorative items purchased from shops and department stores. "I hope Emily likes the doll's house," he murmurs, recalling the elaborate set he ordered months ago, representing the increasingly child-centered nature of Victorian Christmas. Children who earlier in the century might have received a single orange or wooden toy now received multiple gifts, including mechanical toys, books, games, and clothing. Mrs. Thompson returns downstairs. "They're saying their prayers now. Charlotte is with baby Anne," she reports. Charlotte, the family's nursemaid, tends to the infant, while Martha, the cook housemaid, has retired to her small room at the top of the house. "I need to finish the cards tomorrow," Mrs. Thompson continues, picking up her needlework, "and we must decide which charity dinners to attend. The Wilsons have invited us for the 27th, and my sister wants us for New Year's Day." The Victorian social calendar during the Christmas season was busy, filled with church services, charity events, family gatherings, and social calls. "I've invited my colleague Harrison and his wife for dinner on the 23rd. He's been very helpful with the West Midland account," Mr. Thompson adds. "I'll speak to Martha about the menu tomorrow," Mrs. Thompson replies, mentally calculating the appropriate dishes for a business associate. The exchange reveals the complex social calculations governing Victorian entertaining. The food, table setting, and timing of invitations all communicated messages about social status and relationships. Maintaining these social networks was central to a middle-class wife's duties. Nearly 10 o'clock. "Shall we retire?" Mr. Thompson finally asks. Daily rhythms in Victorian households were strict. Meals at regular times, predictable household routines, and bedtimes adhered to closely. Upstairs, the children's rooms reflect the era's attitude toward childhood. William's room has a small desk for schoolwork, bookshelves filled with adventure stories, collections of rocks and bird eggs, and toy soldiers arranged in battle formations. Maps and prints of historical scenes adorn the walls, and his school uniform hangs ready for the next term. Emily's room differs. Her books lean toward moral tales and domestic stories. Her toys include dolls, a miniature tea set, and simple craft materials. A sampler displaying her needlework hangs on the wall. Her desk contains French vocabulary, music practice notes, and arithmetic exercises. Both rooms are Spartan by modern standards. Victorian parenting emphasized character development through discipline, often at the expense of comfort. Bedrooms were kept cool, beds were hard with horsehair mattresses, and children were expected to maintain tidiness and rise early year-round. In the nursery, baby Anne sleeps in an elaborate wooden crib under Charlotte's watchful care. Middle-class Victorian mothers typically employed nursemaids, though they remained more involved than aristocratic mothers of previous generations. Infants stayed in the nursery until around age 4, after which they gradually joined family meals and activities. Separation by age was characteristic of Victorian child-rearing, reflecting the preparation of children for adult roles. Boys for university or professions, girls for domestic and social skills. Downstairs, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson complete their evening routine. The fire is banked to last through the night, the parlor is tidied, and the house is secured. Gas lights are extinguished except for a single flame in the hallway for safety. In the master bedroom, Mrs. Thompson removes the pins from her hair and sits at her dressing table. The elaborate hairstyle that appears effortless in public required significant time each morning. She removes her jewelry, placing it in a decorative box, a gift from her husband on their 10th anniversary. Mr. Thompson winds his pocket watch and places it on the bedside table. Night clothes are modest and fully covering, and personal toilet is conducted discreetly. Despite stereotypes of Victorian prudishness, letters and diaries reveal that many marriages included genuine affection and intimacy. Queen Victoria herself wrote to her eldest daughter, describing the physical aspects of marriage as a blessed part of a loving relationship. "I spoke with Dr. Jenkins today about Anne's cough," Mrs. Thompson says. "He says it's nothing to worry about, just the damp weather." With that, the Thompsons conclude another carefully structured evening in a household that embodies the moral, social, and domestic ideals of late Victorian life. Children are so susceptible in winter. This casual remark reflects a constant background worry in Victorian family life: childhood illness. Even in prosperous households like the Thompsons, diseases that are minor inconveniences today could become life-threatening. Diphtheria, scarlet fever, measles, whooping cough, these and other illnesses claimed young lives across all social classes. Mrs. Parker's youngest died of diphtheria last week, Mrs. Thompson continues soberly. Their third child lost in 5 years. I can't imagine the grief. Child mortality, while improved from earlier decades, remains significantly higher than modern rates. Victorian culture developed elaborate mourning rituals partly in response to this reality. The death of a child was a common experience, but never considered minor. Families preserved locks of hair, posthumous photographs, and small personal items as mementos of deceased children. "We are fortunate indeed," Mr. Thompson responds, looking out at the continuing snowfall. 3 healthy children, a comfortable home, sufficient income. Many would envy our situation. This mixture of gratitude, religious faith, and stoicism characterized much of the Victorian middle-class outlook. Life contained hardships and uncertainties, but proper behavior, hard work, and moral living promised rewards. If not always in this world, then certainly in the next. As the Thompsons prepare for sleep, households across Victorian Britain follow their own evening routines, shaped by class and circumstance. In a grand country house, aristocrats retire after music and card games, assisted by ladies' maids and valets who prepare beds and ensure comfort. In a small rural cottage, a farming family banks the fire that provides heat and cooking facilities, checks the livestock one final time, and retires early to rise before dawn. In London's East End, a working-class mother settles multiple children into shared beds in a cramped 2-room apartment while her husband returns from a late shift at the docks. In a wealthy merchant's mansion, the lady of the house reviews household accounts with her housekeeper before retiring, while downstairs servants complete kitchen cleaning and prepare for morning duties. Despite these differences, certain commonalities prevailed. The Victorian home, whether mansion or cottage, was idealized as a haven from the outside world, a moral space centered on family bonds. Actual experience varied widely based on class, income, and location, but the ideal shaped architecture, furnishings, routines, and expectations. For the Thompsons, home represented more than shelter. It conveyed identity. Their decorations, routines, and relationships expressed who they were, and who they aspired to be, within Britain's intricate social hierarchy. As snow muffles the city outside, sleep claims the Thompson household. Tomorrow will bring more Christmas preparations, social obligations, work, play, and prayer, the rhythms of Victorian life, both recognizable and strange to future observers. London, June 22, 1897. The greatest street party in history. Imagine yourself among the crowds. Millions packed shoulder to shoulder along the 6-mile procession route. Flags, bunting, and flowers decorate the streets. Grandstands are filled with dignitaries from across the globe. Regular folks have camped out for days to secure a good spot. The air buzzes with anticipation as people who would normally never speak to each other, lords and laborers, shopgirls and society matrons, share the same space. Is that her? Is she coming? A small boy asks, tugging at his father's sleeve. Not yet, lad, but soon, the man replies. The Diamond Jubilee, marking 60 years of Victoria's reign, is a celebration unlike anything Britain has ever seen. Part imperial spectacle, part national thanksgiving, part popular festival, and a moment to reflect on how profoundly the world has changed during this queen's lifetime. My grandfather saw her coronation, an elderly man tells strangers nearby. She was just a slip of a girl, nervous as anything. Now look, she's ruled longer than any monarch in our history. A distant roar rises from further down the route. The procession approaches. Military detachments from across the empire, turbaned soldiers from India, Maori warriors from New Zealand, mounted Canadian police in scarlet tunics, African colonial troops, Australian cavalry. The crowd cheers each contingent, witnessing a living display of Britain's global reach. Colonial prime ministers follow in open carriages, then princes and princesses of the royal family, resplendent in military uniforms and gowns. Finally, the royal carriage appears, drawn by 8 cream-colored horses. Inside sits Queen Victoria, now 78, dressed in black as always, but with a bonnet of white ostrich feathers for the occasion. "God bless you, ma'am," someone shouts. The cry ripples through the crowd. Victoria, deeply moved, nods and waves, occasionally dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. "She looks well for her age," a woman remarks. Hard to believe she was born when Napoleon was still alive. Indeed, Victoria's life spanned extraordinary change. Born when travel meant horses and letters, she would live to see automobiles, telephones, electric lights, and moving pictures. From the age of sail to the age of steam, she bridged multiple historical eras. The procession continues to St. Paul's Cathedral. Unable to manage the steps due to arthritis, Victoria remains in her carriage while the Archbishop and clergy conduct the service outdoors, allowing the elderly Queen to engage fully with her subjects. "She's a game old bird," a Cockney fruit seller admires. "Won't let age stop her." Victoria had become a paradox, symbol of tradition and continuity while presiding over unprecedented change. The tiny, round figure in perpetual mourning black had become the personification of the most powerful nation on earth. After the ceremony, she returns to Buckingham Palace, watching from the balcony as thousands cheer below. That evening, bonfires blaze across the country, from Scottish hilltops to Dover cliffs, while special diamond jubilee beacons create a network of light visible for miles, a fitting symbol for an empire on which the sun never set. Yet behind the grand spectacle, Victoria's final years were quieter. After the Jubilee celebrations, she returned to the routines of Windsor, Balmoral in Scotland, and Osborne House on the Isle of Wight, a monarch straddling the line between the public grandeur of empire and the private steadiness of late life. The Queen looked tired at dinner tonight. "I worry about her doing too much at her age," her lady-in-waiting confides to the court physician after a particularly long day of duties. "Her Majesty is remarkably strong for her years," the doctor replies. "But yes, she should rest more than she does." Victoria, however, had never been one to shirk duty. Even in her 80s, she continued to read state papers daily, meet with ministers, write in her journal, and correspond with her vast family network spread across the thrones of Europe. A typical day in her final years began around 7:30 a.m., when her Indian servant, Abdul Karim, would bring her a light breakfast. She would read and respond to correspondence, then dress with the help of her ladies-in-waiting. Despite her wealth and status, Victoria's personal habits were simple: plain food, moderate warmth, cooler rooms, and fresh air. Late mornings might include official papers or meetings, followed by lunch with family or visiting dignitaries. Afternoons, if the weather permitted, involved a drive in an open carriage, a practice she maintained into her final years. "We'll drive to Frogmore this afternoon," she would announce. A sigh could be heard from a shivering lady-in-waiting looking out at the January drizzle. "Better wear 2 shawls," her colleague advised. Even in her 80s, Victoria visited Albert's tomb regularly, a testament to the devotion that had defined her life and reign. After Albert's death in 1861, many feared Victoria would never recover. In a sense, they were right. She never stopped mourning him. Yet she learned to carry her grief while continuing her duties, creating a model of widowhood that many Victorian women emulated. Evenings at court were quieter affairs, dinner with family or courtiers, followed by music or reading aloud. Victoria typically retired by 10:30 p.m., her ladies helping her undress and prepare for bed, after which she often read or wrote in her journal. At Balmoral, she enjoyed more relaxed Highland customs and the company of trusted Scottish servants, while Osborne House offered relative privacy away from official duties. By the close of the 19th century, Victoria remained mentally sharp but physically frail. Her eyesight was failing, she used a wheelchair frequently, and she insisted on standing for ceremonial occasions through sheer force of will. "I'm not as young as I was," she remarked to her daughter Beatrice after a particularly taxing day in the summer of 1900, a rare admission of vulnerability from a woman who had spent her life projecting strength. The world around her was changing rapidly. The first automobiles appeared on British roads in the 1890s. Electric lighting replaced gas in many homes and businesses, and the first cinema films were being shown. Women were beginning to demand the vote, though Victoria herself opposed female suffrage, dismissing it as a mad, wicked folly. Her family had grown enormously. 9 children, 42 grandchildren, and an increasing number of great-grandchildren. Yet family life brought sorrows as well as joys. In 1892, her grandson Prince Albert Victor, second in line to the throne, died of influenza at age 28. In 1900, her second son, Alfred, died of throat cancer, and that same year her favorite grandson, Prince Christian Victor, died of typhoid while serving in the Boer War. "So much death," Victoria wrote in her journal. "I feel I am soon to join them." The Boer War, 1899 to 1902, cast a shadow over her final years. The conflict between Britain and the Boer republics in South Africa proved more difficult than expected, revealing weaknesses in the British military and dividing public opinion. Victoria took a keen interest, sending chocolate gifts to troops and visiting wounded soldiers. "The Queen asked me about conditions in South Africa," a bandaged officer told his hospital roommate. "Knew all the regiments, all the battles. Sharp as an attack despite her age." By December 1900, Victoria celebrated her last Christmas at Osborne House, surrounded by family. In January 1901, she experienced episodes of confusion and weakness. On January 17th, her family was summoned as her condition worsened. Her son and heir, Bertie, the future Edward VII, arrived, along with her eldest grandson, Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany. "I think I am dying," she told her doctors on January 21st. The next day, January 22, 1901, Queen Victoria died at Osborne House, aged 81, after 63 years, 7 months, and 2 days on the throne, the longest reign of any British monarch until Queen Elizabeth II surpassed her in 2015. Victoria had left detailed funeral instructions. She wished to be dressed in white, her wedding veil in place, Albert's dressing gown and a cast of his hand in the coffin, alongside mementos of her family. Secretly, she also requested a lock of John Brown's hair, his photograph, and some of his letters be buried with her, a request discovered only after her death and reluctantly honored by her family. Her funeral, held on February 2, 1901, marked the end of an era. Crowds wept openly along the streets of London. "It's like losing a grandmother," one woman told a reporter. "Even if you never met her, she was always part of your life." Victoria was buried beside Albert in the Royal Mausoleum at Frogmore, finally reunited with a husband whose loss had defined the latter half of her reign. The world she left behind was dramatically different from the one she had inherited in 1837. Britain had transformed from a primarily agricultural nation to the world's leading industrial and imperial power. Its population had more than doubled, and the empire encompassed vast territories across every continent, a testament to both her personal longevity and the era she had defined. Cities had expanded enormously. Technology had revolutionized daily life. Social reforms had improved conditions for many, though poverty and inequality remained. Victoria's son and heir, now King Edward VII, represented a sharp contrast to his mother's style, where she had been dutiful and morally strict. He was sociable and pleasure-loving. The Edwardian era that followed would be marked by gilded exuberance, the last flourish of aristocratic excess before World War I changed everything. Yet Victoria's influence remained. The moral values associated with her reign, family focus, work ethic, charitable involvement, and public service, continued to shape British society long after her death. Victorian architecture still dominated cities and towns. Victorian literature still filled bookshelves. Victorian infrastructure, sewers, railways, and public buildings remained the backbone of daily life. More subtly, Victorian innovations in governance, civil service, education, and public health laid foundations that would evolve into the modern welfare state. The seeds of women's suffrage, labor rights, and other social movements had been planted, even if Victoria herself might have disapproved of where they would lead. The Victorian Empire at its peak carried within it both the height of British global power and the beginnings of its eventual transformation. The colonial troops who had marched so proudly in the Diamond Jubilee procession represented nations that would eventually seek and win independence, reshaping the empire into the Commonwealth. Perhaps Victoria's most lasting legacy was the monarchy itself. When she came to the throne in 1837, the reputation of the British monarchy had been tarnished by the excesses and scandals of her predecessors. Through her long reign, Victoria restored public respect for the crown, establishing a model of constitutional monarchy focused on duty, family, and symbolic national unity rather than direct political power. "The Queen is dead. Long live the King," proclaimed the heralds as Edward VII ascended the throne. But in a very real sense, Victoria's influence never died. Today, Victorian serves as shorthand for an entire worldview, sometimes as criticism, Victorian prudishness, Victorian hypocrisy, and sometimes with nostalgia, Victorian craftsmanship, Victorian values. Behind these generalizations was a real woman who became queen at 18, loved deeply, grieved profoundly, witnessed more change than any previous monarch, and ultimately created a model of constitutional monarchy that continues to this day. Imagine London on that January day in 1901. As news of the Queen's death spread, church bells tolled, theaters and shops closed, newspapers printed special editions, and people gathered in public squares, sharing memories and speculating about the future. "I was born in her first year on the throne," an elderly man told a group of young factory workers. "Lived my whole life under Victoria. Can't quite believe she's gone. What do you think the new king will be like?" asked one of the young men. "Different," the old man replied simply. "Times change, but what she built, that'll last." And he was right. The world Victoria shaped, industrialized, urbanized, and global in outlook, is recognizably our own, despite the enormous changes of the 120-plus years since her death. Victorian photographs may show people stiff and formal, but their letters, diaries, and novels reveal hopes, fears, and feelings that resonate across time. They worried about technology moving too fast, debated the balance between work and family, struggled with ethical questions about wealth, and celebrated achievements while mourning losses. They fell in love, raised children, pursued careers, and sought meaning, just as we do. The Victorian era, for all its strangeness to modern eyes, was a pivotal moment in creating the world we inhabit. And at its center was Victoria herself, not just a queen, but a woman whose life spanned one of the most transformative periods in human history, who grew from an inexperienced teenager to a global icon whose name became synonymous with an age. As you settle into your comfortable, clean bed with electric lights you can switch off with a touch, perhaps take a moment to appreciate how many aspects of your daily life have roots in Victoria's time. The books on your shelf, the pipes that bring water to your home, the birthday cards you send, the Christmas traditions you celebrate. The Victorians were not so different from us. People trying to make sense of a rapidly changing world, looking both forward and backward, building something new while preserving what was valuable from the past. Sleep well, and perhaps dream of gaslit streets, steam trains, and a tiny woman in black who ruled a quarter of the world.